Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here, back from Udine. It was a bit of a long connecting flight back, but we're back. Arrived too late really to do a video last night, so apologies. I know this normally would have been 24 hours earlier, but it gave me some time to kind of do bits and pieces, digging around. I wrote this big kind of behind the scenes piece today, which kind of is on Spurs transfer window so far, Thomas Frank, what life is like with him at the club, from players' perspective, staff perspective, how he was even appointed in the first place. So it kind of lends itself really into doing that in the video now, because I know there's some people that don't read articles, they don't want to do that, and I know some people in the modern era consume their information via video and audio and everything, so this kind of little extra 24 hours or so has allowed me to kind of incorporate all of that into this video, so we can kind of talk about that. We can talk about the press conference today where with Thomas Frank, a nice early morning one, which I was really excited about, having to work really late last night doing an article. So thanks, Thomas, for the early start. And then, obviously, got to touch on the match there in Udine against PSG. I thought it was incredibly kind of them to produce a matchday programme that not only fitted my wall perfectly, but was lacking in any creativity whatsoever. So fair play. Fair play to UEFA or whoever decided that. But yeah, it does kind of almost blend into it. It's quite a navy theme going on apart from that. We can talk about loads of bits and pieces in this. So apologies if it is a longer one, but we've got loads to tackle. We've got loads to dig into. The Premier League season is almost upon us, so we've got lots to try and cover, and hopefully this will give people plenty to listen to and think about over at least tonight, tomorrow as well, and maybe some of it feeds nicely into the game tomorrow afternoon and perhaps afterwards if you haven't seen it by that point. I want to start with this whole kind of behind the scenes digging up stuff that I've been doing. I haven't literally been there with a spade going around Hotspur Way, upsetting all the groundsmen and ground staff. But I have kind of made this concerted effort really to try and get behind the scenes a fair bit and just understand what's going on at the club, what the Thomas Frank era has been like, and also bits and pieces like the Morgan Gibbs-White stuff, like what's the real background behind that from a Tottenham perspective. I feel like we've heard a lot of this, I've said this in previous videos, there's a lot of stuff coming out of maybe the other end of that saga, but we haven't heard a lot that seems to have come out from within Spurs. Lots of bits of that, touching on that. Where should we start? Let's start right at the beginning. I think that's probably the best place to start. So, obviously, we know that Thomas Frank's Premier League journey with Tottenham will start tomorrow in the dugout, 3 p.m, a Saturday afternoon kickoff. A very rare occurrence at Tottenham over the years. But his adventure at Tottenham kind of began before he even knew it was going to take place. And that's because we know, we don't have to say this, but I'm going to for the storytelling element of this, we know that Tottenham wanted to wait for the emotions of that night in Bilbao, the programme that normally sits there, the parade through North London, estimated 220,000 fans through the streets. They wanted to wait for all the emotions to die down before they made a decision on the future of Ange Postecoglou. Of course, they stuck to what their original thinking was, which was to sack him. He was sacked. His compatriot, Spurs chief football officer, Scott Munn, placed on gardening leave. An Australian exodus, if you will. So what they did from that point, it was down to, obviously, Daniel Levy, the new CEO, Vinay Venkatesham, Johan Lang as technical director, to push on with this process of appointing a new head coach. So from what I understand, from kind of digging into all of this, Spurs used data modelling to identify 50 different coaches that would suit exactly what they were looking for at the club. That would also include a number of hypothetical candidates who just simply weren't available, but they used it to kind of help contrast and compare the data. It's kind of, I guess it's standard practice in other scientific fields, not unavailable coaches, but you know what I mean. I guess it's to call it a matrix, don't they? A comparison matrix to be able to see exactly where people sit in various areas. So that was that. And then, on top of that, to ensure the best possible candidate and also the best possible chance of avoiding the mistakes of the past. We know Spurs have made plenty of those, both in recruitment of head coaches and recruitment of players. So to kind of try to avoid that as best they could, they drew up this list of 10 criteria for the prospective candidates. Just a couple of them off the top of my head. Playing attractive football, of course, developing young players, and good communication skills with the media were believed to be 3 of the 10 criteria. Then when all of that criteria was taken into account, that left them with 4. After 3! I knew it! Do you know what? When you doubt yourself, like, how many fingers do you just hold up? I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. Please forgive me. I can't believe I just went, oh, what an idiot. I'm so glad I looked. That would have been one that comments would just, well, you're still going to take the mickey out of me, and that's absolutely right, and you should. But anyway, with 4 candidates, I can count. All of those 4 prospective 4 candidates held meetings with the club, and Thomas Frank, as you probably now are fully aware, unanimous choice of the board, and Johan Lange, and he was contacted, I think it was just a couple of days after the final game of the season against Brighton. So that was the time frame when it all started to begin, where they were kind of seeing what candidates were available and stuff like that. That was when his journey began. If you've read my long read piece on Thomas Frank's crazy summer plans, you'll know that the talks then took place between Spurs and Thomas Frank and Brentford, all while he was embarking on various summer plans, which included a road trip to Denmark to go and fetch his dog with his wife Nana. He spent time in Spain with his mother and his sister. And actually after the announcement that he got the Spurs gig, he had this huge party back in his homeland for 50 people, I think it was, which had always been pre-planned. It wasn't like, hey, I'm the Spurs manager. I don't know why he talked like that, but that's not what it was about. It was a pre-planned thing to celebrate life. It was something they'd planned for years, and finally decided to do it. And in his words, I can't actually use his words because he swore when he told us about it out in South Korea. Essentially all this Spurs stuff suddenly came along. I think it was the day before the day he arrived and was still in the planning stage of this party. But yes, one key thing for Spurs to understand, or they felt that Thomas Frank needed to understand, was the scale of the job he was about to walk into. With no disrespect to Brentford, who are an incredibly well-run club, this is no Brentford. There's no bees here. This is very much, I was going to say a load of cockerels, but it sounds a bit weird. It is a club that has got a level of scrutiny that is nothing like Thomas Frank has ever experienced before. And that was kind of, they wanted to make sure he was aware of that and ready for that. I mean, take something as simple as his morning exercise. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but Thomas Frank would often go out for early runs around the local area, around Brentford. They kind of wanted to make sure that he was fully aware. Just little things like this. He would no longer be able to do that. I actually asked him, I think in a lift about this. I can't remember. But he went on, and I know that sounds weird, but he went on a run in Hong Kong around Victoria Harbour. I mean, very, very hot as well. I don't know how I managed that. I did one in Korea, and yeah, it was not pretty. I think the people, when I got back to the hotel, were just like, do you have to come in? You look very sweaty. But yes, he had a similar experience, and that really probably one of the last times he'll be able to do his kind of morning routine, which is running around a public area, because it's Tottenham Hotspur, boss. You're going to be seen, you're going to be stopped, it's going to be difficult to do that. He now, from my understanding, I think he runs around inside Hotspur Way. The Hotspur Way is a huge complex, and I think within its walls there is kind of a loop you could do, having kind of been around most of Hotspur Way. So I think he does that, and he does quite competitive gym work with various staff members each morning in the club gym as well. They also wanted Spurs to work on, him and Johan Lange really worked on ensuring his coaching staff filled in the gaps of his experience of European competition. Obviously, I think he had 10 Europa League qualifying matches to his name about 10 years ago, and that's it. So they wanted to bring staff on that had that experience. We've spoken about that before, so I don't need to go into any more into that. And I think it was on the tour, really, where Thomas Frank realised the scale of Spurs. You know, with Brentford have their fan base, but Spurs fan base is millions. And when you go abroad and you I've been very privileged to do this, in reporting on a team. You see how huge it is across the world, and what incredible kind of passionate fans there are across the world of Spurs. And I think he realised that really on this tour. He's kind of admitted that since. And obviously he immediately had the Sonny situation to deal with, which is a huge thing for him to deal with in this first summer at a football club. You might be aware, I told you before, reported on this, that when he first was appointed, he called a number of the senior players. Sonny was the only one that said to him, I want to get out of here. I'm done. I've done everything I can for this football club. He didn't exactly say it like that, but you know what I mean. He felt he'd achieved everything he could and needed a new challenge. And from everything I understand by speaking to people inside the club, outside the club, and what Sonny said as well, the way Thomas Frank dealt with it, inside and out of the club, was perfect. Absolutely perfect. He drew real praise from everyone for the way he dealt with it. So that's a big tick. That's one big thing, huge thing he had to deal with straight off the bat. And he's done well there. And I think the other thing, that's actually probably a good thing to talk about, is his communication style. He has this openness, I think is a good way to put it, a positive approach, which is something shared by his coaching staff. And don't forget, last season towards the end, it was tough at Spurs. There were a lot of kind of beaten down people, a lot of down faces kind of thing. There was injuries, there was negativity, as in, the way things were being kind of seen. The results in the Premier League, of course, would provoke that as well. Christian Romero spoke in his Instagram post saying goodbye to Ange Postecoglou about the obstacles they had to overcome. So this was a team that needed a bit of a pick-me-up. Of course, they had the Europa League as a huge pick-me-up, but going into the next season, they needed things to be as positive as possible. And that's not to say it wouldn't have been under Postecoglou, but, Thomas Frank had to come in and not be this kind of strict, hard taskmaster. You will do this. This is what I want. Had to come in with this very balanced tone, and he has apparently struck that really well. One of the consistent things you'll hear said about Thomas Frank if you speak to anyone is, and people keep saying this, he's just a good human being. And that's players, that's staff, everyone I've spoken to has said the same thing. And look, that's not to say that he is all sunshine and smiles. Absolutely not. Even in press conferences, there's times when he's talking and he can be really smiley and talking, and just suddenly has this glare. It's actually wide-eyed glare, which is, I don't know whether it's a Danish thing or not, but it is like, whoa, it catches you off guard. It's like a sudden change in the way he is. And apparently he can be like that with the players as well. And of course, Yves Bissouma has already discovered that, he is a tough guy in certain non-negotiables, including timekeeping, and you can't negotiate it. It's a non-negotiable. That's what it's all about. And obviously we know now Bissouma's frequent tardiness cost him his place in the Super Cup squad. And what's that, third summer in a row where he's disappointed the head coach just before the season began. Let's be honest, it's probably like to be his last summer at the club either way, because he's in his final almost 10 months of his contract. So yes, he's Bissouma, upsetting people wherever he goes. It's such a shame. He's so frustrated because I think he's got such a great player within him. He just can't help just disappointing managers and stuff. And, I wrote a piece about him a couple of days back, or mentioned him in another piece. And, he had issues with timekeeping with Postecoglou. He had issues, obviously, other things that got him suspended at the start of last season. He had issues already with Thomas Frank and timekeeping. And from what I understand, under Antonio Conte, there were some issues sometimes with his training levels and things like that. And it's just like, what can you do? How many chances can you give someone to kind of fulfill the incredible, potential? He's 29 in a couple of weeks' time. It's so frustrating. But also on Thomas Frank, you might remember Ange Postecoglou had this way about him. Wasn't a man for small talk, I think is the best way to put it. He could have some great conversations with people, but on the whole, wasn't his favourite thing to do in the world, and he would admit that himself. So you would kind of think the very conversational and seemingly chatty Thomas Frank is going to come in and be completely opposite. Well, not exactly. from what I'm kind of digging around and speaking to lots of people that would kind of know about this, some inside the Spurs squad he has spoken to quite a bit, the players individually in longer moments, including a number of those senior players that we spoke about earlier. But some players, from what I understand, have kind of mostly dealt with him in little bits and pieces, mainly really spoken to his coaching staff since his arrival, only getting these like brief moments of conversation with him in what has been 5 weeks since the players came back. And I should stress that's not entirely unusual for like a Premier League manager, especially when you've got such a large squad to deal with. That's a key thing to remember here. But I do think there's certainly some players who they're kind of unsure exactly whether Thomas Frank wants them, or what he thinks of them at this point is probably the best way to put it. And perhaps that's the part of the plan that keeps people on their toes. You know, maybe anyone that thought they would be a shoo-in or a guarantee, maybe a bit like, you know, I've got to really fight for this. So it could be a tactical thing, like a psychological tactical thing. But yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting. I was hearing that some players haven't really had that many long discussions with him about the plans for them or anything like that, and just kind of everyday stuff. So he has got a big coaching staff as well, let's not forget that. So there's a lot of people delegated to deal with a lot of things at Tottenham as well. But I just thought that was interesting, little kind of snippet. Players from my understanding are enjoying the training sessions so far. Of course, they're new, they're fresh, they're different. That's going to happen. It always is at the start of any managerial reign. The training sessions are packed with detail, a lot of defensive stuff as well. Those 1 kilometre runs in the heat, obviously not as excitable as loved by the players, but I'm sure they understand it. It's part of their conditioning. So, and it's also quite competitive as well. I think players do really like the competitive. Otherwise, they wouldn't be players. And also, you've got Justin Cochrane and Matty Wells, who are close friends, highly rated coaches. They know Spurs inside out. Both of them coached in the academy and everything. They've been drawing up plenty of very kind of interesting sessions to help build the structure required around required in this team right now with everything they want to get out of it. And Andreas Georgsson as well, deserves credit. We'll talk a little bit about that with the PSG game, but his set piece and restart work, I think we know it's quickly paid dividends. They've scored a few set piece goals now, and I think those kind of situations, we had an interview with Ben Davis out in Hong Kong, and he spoke about the coaching staff have really identified what he called low-hanging fruit. It's very good kind of metaphor there of things that they can just go, okay, well, we'll have that. That will get us better. And those are the kind of things, the set pieces and the restarts, the long throws, things like that instantly can just give you an extra couple of percent in matches. And we saw that on Wednesday night. You've got all of that. We've got the blocking drills. You might have seen those as well. They've borne fruit, going back to the fruit analogy as well, or metaphor. Players putting their bodies on the line. We've seen that in a few of the friendlies now, and it's definitely something that is being built into them as an instinct, which is great. Just putting their bodies on the line, I guess, just to stop the ball going into the net. And talking of bodies, injuries, of course, in his first summer, Thomas Frank have not been exclusive to the Ange Postecoglou era. He's very much suffering from this now. He's lost Solanke, Udogie, Manor Solomon straight off the bat, Kota Takai straight off the bat, James Maddison, of course, the big one that's going to miss most of the season. He already had Decky, Dragoshin, Brian Hill. Obviously, we know whether Brian Hill was going to play or not. It's probably a different thing, but they were all off the books when he joined, really. There's a belief within Tottenham that the load on the players was maybe not managed correctly during last summer's pre-season. And I think especially you had players coming back from the Copa America and the Euros who were, maybe had to be pushed too soon into the season or too quickly into the season. And I think probably maybe that's the element where Postecoglou's extreme style of play, which had more sprints than any other team in the Premier League, when players are kind of already been kind of the load managed hasn't been perfect, maybe that plays more of a part as well. It's look, the medical side of things definitely feels like it's a combination of everything rather than any specific part. I think I reported last month that Spurs Director of Performance Services Adam Brett and Head of Sports Science Nick Davies had both left the club after just a year. I think Davies was potentially going to Everton. I haven't checked into that to see whether that actually happened or not. Spurs are in the process of appointing 2 new heads of those departments, but that's more the big picture stuff. On the day-to-day running of those departments, everything is as is, and dealing with another busy physio room. Of course, transfers, another key aspect of Thomas Frank's first summer. Both those made, those missed, and I think there is an acceptance within Spurs and understanding that, yes, the uncertainty that was created around Postecoglou's future did impact transfer activity out of the gate in those early weeks. Of course it did. If Postecoglou was in place, they could have moved quickly to things he wanted to be done. But being unsure about that, and then obviously the little process that was involved after in getting Thomas Frank through the door, it was always going to kind of delay what they were going to do this summer, rightly or wrongly. Then I think after that, we had this kind of period which some inside Spurs have kind of compared to Arne Slot's first summer at Liverpool, or first few months, where just kind of working out exactly what the squad was like, knowing it more on the inside, having just only seen it on the outside, before really committing to bringing in many new faces, looking at the weaknesses and strengths that they already had. And of course, we know Matisse Tell's loan was made permanent. Takai came in as a kind of a prospect from Japan. The first big move, of course, was Mohamed Kudus, £55 million signing from West Ham. We know that that was meant to be £115 million double signing over the course of 48 hours with, the now infamous Morgan Gibbs-White saga. So, just to kind of, some of this you're going to know, some of this you might not know, but I've been digging around this subject as well in the last couple of days. So, of course, if you weren't aware, I've reported this before, Thomas Frank wanted Morgan Gibbs-White for years, back when he was at Wolves as well. We wanted to take him to Brentford. Spurs attracted him for a long time as well. Fabio Paratici would often go to Forest games and Wolves games back in the day, and when he used to go and watch Forest, he liked him then. Same with Wolves in the past too, and just Tottenham in general just liked the player. But from a Thomas Frank perspective, he felt Morgan Gibbs-White's kind of mobility, his creativity as a number 10 was just the perfect fit for the Tottenham side and what he could do. And it was a deal that Spurs felt that they could make happen. So, let's start from the beginning of this. The North London club, Tottenham Hotspur, as we know them, made a £60 million bid for the player. It appeared in what they thought or seemed to have triggered a release clause. There's some debate over that since, over whether it truly unlocked all the elements of the release clause or not, but they put in the £60 million bid, with it having been made very clear to them that Gibbs-White was keen on the move, wanted to play Champions League football, wanted to play for Thomas Frank. Simple enough, yeah? Well, you'd think so. Spurs, from what I understand, put in a call to Forest before they made the bid to say, look, we're going to officially lodge this bid, just to ensure they were properly informed. Everything seemed to be in place. The medical staff at Spurs were readied, as they always are, at any moment's notice, that in case there was a medical to be done. From what I understand, Morgan Gibbs-White told some of his close friends that he was due to depart to go down to North London for the medical. Then things got weird. He would never end up leaving Nottingham because the Midlands club and their owner, certainly a certain Evangelos Marinakis, made it very clear to him that he was not going to be sold and that the club were very unhappy about everything and the way it was dealt with. And Forest felt there had been a legal approach within it all, and they claimed that the release clause was a confidential one and it should never have been disclosed, or they believed it had been disclosed. Legal action was threatened as well. You might remember at the time that there was this kind of feeling that the bid made by Spurs was exactly what the release clause was. But like I said, there's still this confusion over whether it truly unlocked all of the release clause or not, which I think is an underpinning thing of all of this. So from what I understand, in the days ahead, after all the mess started, as everyone's kind of looking at their different options of what they could do, Spurs made a second bid for Gibbs-White, which was higher than the original release clause price. Forest again, Spurs called them to let them know, look, we're going to put in this offer. For his part, Gibbs-White did everything by the book. We saw it, returned to pre-season training, went on there pre-season training camp after a couple of little worries at home, which thankfully all look like they've completely solved. I think he's now, as his child has come along, which is fantastic. And all along, despite him being back at Forest, Spurs were assured that Morgan Gibbs-White remained keen on the move, and there was this confidence that the transfer would be sealed eventually. It might take a little while, but the player that they felt, and Thomas Frank felt, was perfect for his system, would be wearing that Tottenham Hotspur shirt at some point. Then, suddenly out of the blue, Spurs got wind of the fact that we now know that Gibbs-White was suddenly about to sign a new contract with Forest. And lo and behold, we get that video, which is, one that will be analysed for all time, I think, of Morgan Gibbs-White thanking Mr. Marinakis, stood beside him on a pitch in Portugal for this new whopping 3-year club record contract, making him Forest's top earner. Spurs left flabbergasted, of course. Experienced people within the North London club say privately that never experienced a situation like this before, where you've got a player so keen to join and then suddenly signs a new contract, just completely out of the blue. There's a lot of people that felt like surely this decision couldn't be a financial one, because I don't think what was being offered was, I don't know, I'm just assuming, was any different to what Spurs were going to offer. So financially, it didn't seem to be something that was the case. Thomas Frank, the Spurs hierarchy, of course, disappointed with the situation, and from what I understand, Gibbs-White reached out and personally contacted Thomas Frank to apologise for the way things played out, to which Thomas Frank told him he had nothing to apologise for and it wasn't his fault. And Spurs had to push on. They had to push on without the player that really was seen as the ideal number 10 for the new look Tottenham side under Thomas Frank, which obviously, that's incredibly frustrating. When you've got everything set, it all seems to be fine, it's all going away, and suddenly it's almost like getting punched in the face, isn't it? When you think everything's absolutely fine and it's a sunny day. So what else are transfers? Obviously, I spoke about this before, they looked at various Brentford players that Thomas Frank would have been interested to bring with him. They looked at Christian Norgard, but Arsenal had already made their move for him. They eventually went for João Palhinha, of course, from Bayern Munich to bring him into that role. Another experienced player, 30 years old. Brian Mbeumo wanted by Thomas Frank, but he'd already set his mind that he was going to Man United. There's interest in Johan Wissa, which I think was reciprocated as well, but Spurs couldn't really take that any further while having both Richarlison and Solanke in place. It was and especially, we'll talk about Richarlison a bit, but, you've got two players. It would have been difficult to have all three, especially when you've got other players that can play up front as well for Spurs. What else? Of course, we had during the tour, Thomas Frank continued to further assess his squad, decided he wanted another centre-back, as well as that number 10, mainly due to the concerns about Romero and Van der Ven's availability last season. And of course, the fact he's going to play a back three at times, which we saw on Wednesday night. So, I saw Hincapié, is it pronounced? I saw that just before I was getting on as one of the ones. Spurs have liked him for ages. He has been linked last 3 years, maybe, with a move to Spurs. It'd be an interesting one. Maybe, I don't really know any more about that, but it's certainly, like I said, it's someone they've been interested in for a while. So feels like there's always these players that have kind of been around for ages, like Eze, like Gibbs-White has been linked for ages. Brendan Johnson was linked with Spurs for ages before he moved. It's almost like they've just been sitting there thinking, we will get you eventually, we will. The longest burning transfer things ever. You just imagine Leandro Di Maio might suddenly pop up, or Rivaldo gets signed. So it's a funny club in that respect. The managers might change, but sometimes they still seem to go for the same players that they liked 2 or 3 managers ago. But that's a whole other subject that we could dive into one day. So I wanted another centre-back, of course, and if I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, Hincapié. Please let me know, those who understand their pronunciations far better than I do. So that was a centre-back. Then, of course, while he knew that Sonny wanted to go, they weren't entirely sure that Sonny was going to go, and eventually that move did happen to LAFC. And Thomas Frank made it clear to the hierarchy that he wanted another winger to bring in a bit more guile, a bit more excitement and guile and creativity to that side. And he loved the idea of Savinho at Manchester City. But, there was a kind of a feeling of, well, he's probably not available. And then they kind of got wind that maybe he would be if they could put in a big enough bid. And that seems to be the case. He's only 21, but he had this terrific season as a 20-year-old at Man City. For me, I know some people kind of criticise the numbers, but I think for a 20-year-old, first season in a club where he's going to have a lot of competition, he's going to be in and out of the team, although he did play a fair few minutes. I think he got into double figures and assists. I just think he's incredibly exciting. Yeah, he's a bit raw, but my goodness, he's now got experience of Champions League, Club World Cup. It's exactly what Thomas Frank said a few weeks back of experience doesn't have to be an older player. It can be someone that's played at a high level. He's obviously at Girona as well, and he can play on the left, he can play on the right, he can play through the middle if required as well. And yeah, it's someone that clearly is a player of great interest to Spurs, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him because Pep Guardiola has been speaking about him as well. And then there's a number 10 role, of course, with Morgan Gibbs-White off the table. Spurs seem to have returned to their long-held interest in Eberechi Eze, especially with Arsenal appearing to call their interest. I hope that's how it remains, that they don't suddenly burst out of the shadows, pulsing from the shadows. And there's been indications Spurs have had that he would be keen on the move, Eze. He wants to play Champions League football. And there's a feeling among some analysts that maybe Eze doesn't have the physical data that Gibbs-White does, but he does possess that bit of magic, that bit of special je ne sais quoi that can unlock opponents, when you've got a low block. And he can play it through the centre, he can play out wide as well. I love Eberechi Eze. I just think him and Savinho, honestly, if Spurs were able to do those two deals, for me, it might be one of the greatest transfer windows ever. Just purely because I love Kudus as well, is very exciting. And those two players, for me, they're players that I watched last season. I was just like, I'd love to see them in a Spurs shirt. And it would be amazing if they kind of could get that through. I mean, Eze, you might have heard me say this before when he's been linked in previous windows. He is represented by CAA Base, who have this massive presence at Spurs. They represent loads of players like Maddison, I think Sarr as well. Richarlison was, I can't remember if he still is with them, but lots of the younger players too. I think Porro's base, Sonny was or still is. They've kind of helped facilitate his move to LA. And they've got this really strong relationship with Levy. So if anyone can try and get this done, I guess it would be Base working with Palace and Spurs to try and get a move done. Spurs are going to try to get a deal done for both of these players. I'm sure there'll be twists and turns. There always is with Spurs. And we just spoke about a deal where they thought it was done and they thought the player was about to come for a medical and suddenly nothing has happened and he's on a new contract. So anything can happen, but I think we'll all be kind of keeping a very close eye on what's going to happen with those two players because they're ones they would really love, I think, and I would love them too. So I've really got a vested interest in them happening. It's a bit like when I was a kid, my favourite player was Gary Lineker. And obviously a massive Spurs fan. I was born that way. So when Gary Lineker was coming to Spurs, it was the greatest coming together of everything I loved about football. And even as a fair few years on, to get Eze and Savinho through the door, which it would be so exciting going to watch matches again, watching players with that kind of flair and creativity and Kudus as well. Opposing defences would not know where to go to try and stop Spurs. It would transform Tottenham from a team that maybe could be a bit predictable and pedestrian at times into something that has just got that wow factor. And that's without even Kulusevski and Maddison to come back eventually into that. It would just be amazing. It would be amazing. But let's see. They've got to get them done first, and that is something that is is not always the done thing at Tottenham. Is that pardon the pun? I don't think it really is when you say the same word twice. But yeah, look, it would give this massive double dose of quality into the squad, a much needed increase in transfer spending, I think, as well. And look, would bring them up to the kind of sums being spent by their rivals this summer, who are all kind of in the 200 million bracket, the big boys, and Spurs. They're going to have to spend that sort of stuff. They can't lose. That gap can't get any bigger. It really can't. It was big enough last season. There are going to be new contracts coming. You know, Jed Spence seems like that's going to happen or be announced very soon. You know, if it hasn't already before this, just checking out some quotes there about something. Just checking there's nothing we need to talk about. No, there's some ones I'm going to talk about anyway. Rodrigo Bentancur, you know, he's in the final 10 months of his deal as well. Thomas Frank has constantly spoken about how he really likes Bentancur and wants him to stay for the long term, and he's the kind of player that you can build a team around. So that you would assume would get done. There's certainly been no noises that Bentancur doesn't want to stay as of yet. That would be an interesting one to come out of the woodwork. He seems happy. So hopefully that's something that gets tied up soon enough. And there's going to be more departures. Of course, there are in the coming days and weeks, I would imagine. The squad is still bloated. And I know that sounds weird when we talk about the players they need, but in certain areas it is bloated. There's certainly some fringe players, and there are homegrown issues in terms of the foreign players and how many you can name. I'll go into all of that if they sign one or two of those two players that we just spoken about, or anyone else, because it's kind of more relevant when the new phase comes in, really. What else? Yeah, of course, everything that we've spoken about, the training sessions in the PSG game, although it was incredibly disappointing in the outcome, of course it was. I think a lot of the game itself justified what Thomas Frank and his coaches are doing with the squad, so that's big for the players, really, because they're seeing like, oh, okay, we see what you mean. Fair enough. What you've told us to do, it should have beaten, you know, the best team in Europe and arguably the world. I know Chelsea beat them in the final, but let's be honest, there hasn't really been a better team than PSG over the course of the last year. And there's other sides to it. We'll talk about that and their freshness and all this sort of stuff and all rustiness. But I'm really intrigued to see how tomorrow's game, this is Friday, if you're watching this tomorrow, today's game, against Burnley is going to go. Because for me, we took a lot out of the game against PSG in terms of being able to analyse what he did, Thomas Frank. But I'm almost, probably even more so intrigued to see how he sets up against a team that will play with a low block, that will try to defend, and also doing so without creative players, you know, key players as well, probably not being fresh because they'd played on Wednesday night and 48 hours after they landed back in London. And I think parallels will be drawn to last season and how, you know, Postecoglou and his coaches had to manage that kind of situation, shorn of all the creative players and trying to win games with fringe players coming into, or second string players, if you will, and how Thomas Frank deals with that. I think it's going to be a very interesting kind of thing to look at. It'll be a bit like, oh, well, you're having similar problems, or, oh, fair enough, you know how to unlock that. So we shall find out, 3:00 tomorrow afternoon. It'll all begin at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Because, look, this is a challenge like nothing he's had before. You know, 62,000 fans at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. He admitted today he will have butterflies in his stomach when he goes into that game. The little quotes, the update on Savinho. Pep Guardiola was asked about him today. And he said, let's see, I've got all the quotes here. He said, whether it's Tottenham in that case or any other club, a player should call the club. I am only concerned right now that Savinho will be with us for the rest of the season, hopefully many years, because at 21, with the potential he has to improve in final positions, he is an extraordinary player. Otherwise, he would not have played more than 3,000 minutes last season. At the end, as always, the desire of the players is above everything, but then they have to find an agreement with the club. If they don't take an agreement, the player will be here because the club spends money on those players. So it kind of started off as if he was saying that he's here forever. And as it went on, it was a bit like, oh, maybe you're suggesting here that the player wants to go. And it seems to be that he is keen on the move. And then he admitted later in the press conference, Guardiola, that City's squad is too big and players are going to have to leave this summer. And then he kind of suddenly remembered that Savinho is injured, which was interesting, and wouldn't be in the squad for the game against Wolves. He'd picked up an injury, he said a few weeks. He'll be out for a few weeks, an injury picked up against Palermo. So, yeah, it was quite a funny one. I think Edison's out as well, and he's been linked with a move too. So we'll see where that goes in the coming days. I know there's been reports of Savinho's agent flying to England to try and get the deal done. So let's hope from a Tottenham perspective that comes to pass. Thomas Frank's press conference today, like I said, nice early one, 9 a.m. in the morning. Not good when you're writing until 2 in the morning. But, you know, we move, we keep going, we keep plodding along. Nothing like being knackered before the season's even started. I am really looking to excited about 3 o'clock Saturday game. I really am. We just feel like the games have been all over the place this summer. I think I worked out. Oh, I'm not even going to go into the amount of flights I've done. It's like it's first world problems, isn't it? It's such a stupid thing to. I'm not moaning about it, but press conference back on track, Alistair. Team news, let's start with that. He said every player, as in from the last game, is available for the team. Destiny Doggy's progressing, but it's too early for him to be involved in the squad. He spoke about Matisse Tell. If you're not aware, Matisse Tell was abused and racially abused on social media after missing the penalty in the shootout, sending it wide, because we live in, unfortunately, that kind of world now. And he said on Matisse, it's of course terrible what happened to Matty, and we're doing everything we can to support him in this situation. He's a strong person, and with hopefully support from his family, friends and us, he'll get through it. But there's also no real Tottenham supporter that will ever do that. The real Tottenham supporters that we'll see tomorrow at the stadium, they'll back him. I expect them to. Listen, in tough times we step up together, and I expect the fans to give him a really, really, really big cheer tomorrow. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. I wrote a similar thing in my piece after the game. They're not the real fans. They're not. Any Spurs fans that did that are just not Spurs support. The word is supporters, isn't it? That's just, it's disgusting. It really is. He was asked if Spurs need to add players, and he said, first and foremost, in many ways, I'm very happy with the squad. I think there's a lot of good players. I think we saw a team that was very, very, very competitive against PSG. And on any other day, we'd have beaten the best team in Europe. Of course, we want to be as strong and competitive a squad as possible. I know that Daniel, Johan and Vinay are working night and day, and they have, by the way, been working night and day the last, 6, 7, 8 weeks. They definitely would like to do deals early. Sometimes I think we need to understand it's not that easy, but they are working. He was asked about Bissouma, to which he said, there was a situation, I addressed this, there was a consequence. Bissouma will be in the squad tomorrow, move forward, and we have a big game tomorrow. I tried to follow up on Bissouma, and I asked him, essentially, did he have quite a long chat with him? And I kind of said to him, look, going to be 29 in a couple of weeks. This player is meant to be someone that the young players look up to. And he is consistently doing things each summer and throughout a season that belies that kind of status as a player that the youngsters should look up to. He didn't bite. He just kind of went, we deal with things internally and all that, which was a shame. It'd be nice to know his real thoughts on it, but I think maybe we'll get that if Bissouma does depart, which would seem odd if he doesn't, let's be honest, this summer. But I think what frustrated me even more about the Bissouma situation is that by doing that and getting rightly punished, I think, I don't have any kind of dispute with what happened. If you're told constantly, be on time, and he's constantly not on time and is missing and getting there late for things that are happening, then he shouldn't have played. But what the knock-on effect was, Bissouma could have come on for Paulinho in that game. And that might have meant that Spurs won that. It might not have. He might have brought someone down for a penalty. Who knew? Who knows? But as an experienced player, you could argue it would have given them a better chance of seeing out that game and having another trophy. So he, in a way, in a small part, has impacted Spurs not winning that game. I'm not saying it's a total part. They should have held on to the game themselves. There's various reasons we'll talk about quickly at the end of this. But yeah, that annoys me. It does. Like I said, it's mostly frustration at how good he can be. My second question that I followed that up with when he wouldn't give me anything on Bissouma, I asked about Richarlison. And I said, look, one of the best performances for me in the Spurs show. I thought he got better and better and better, Richarlison. I think he was so good up front and holding the ball up. And I said, does that show you, if you weren't aware, just how important he can be if you can keep that player fit? And he said, yeah, I think Richie was phenomenal. I think his hold-up play, his intensity, his pressing, his arriving in the box, and so it was really, really top, really, and his attitude, top. So I hope to see more of that. Of course, we're aware of the fitness situation. That's something we've monitored closely. That's why, for example, he didn't play the first game against Reading, because we didn't feel that he was ready. So we'll really do our best to help him, and he's on it. He's very focused. That's the main thing, and hopefully he can keep up the level. I asked him as well about Manor Solomon, because it's kind of felt we haven't really heard anything about him. We don't really know about his injury return. We don't know about his plans for him. Is he going to be part of the future or not at Spurs? And he said, well, every player that is here is part of the plans, which is a stock answer. Whenever you ask that question, I should have known it was coming. But then he did say Manor is just back from his injury. In terms of being on the pitch, he had a part training with the team yesterday, so hopefully he can progress after that. So we'll see. George Sessions from PA asked him about all the young players going out on loan. And, these are players that played a bit of a part last season. and what was the thinking really behind sending so many out on loan with more to follow. And he said, I think it's important that there is a fine balance between, let's say, a lot of learning, training with the first team here, but I also think, I think that the learning for the intensity, physicality, and professional high-level players is very good, and also part of having enough players in the squad. But then the next bit is the most important thing for any player, getting minutes. And so that is the balance, and we thought it was the right moment to get them out. It was a long answer, so I'm going to kind of just paraphrase this. He was asked if he needed to change the team tomorrow because of having played or returned to England 48 hours ago. And he said, yes, there was a lot of physical demands and the heat, but the players have recovered well. They've got a good team behind them. And he also said, I'm a big believer of when needed, use 5 subs to bring that energy and freshness of the pitch. So he's saying it's not just about the starting lineup. And he said, I'm also a big believer it's the third game that's more tricky than the second, which suggests he's going to go quite strong, really, with his team. And the third game, obviously, City, is a break between. There's not a midweek game, is it? I think it's next Saturday? So it's a week between them. So it kind of suggests that you can get some players through all 3 games. We've got more stuff coming at 10:30 tonight that's quite good. Keep an eye out for that. The usual embargo stuff, which people don't know an embargo section. It is for the national newspapers. It's an old-fashioned thing to essentially have less chance of people seeing it online before it goes into the newspapers in the morning. It's a very old tradition that is probably, I would imagine, won't be around for too much longer, but certainly is something that means we always keep this little bit for later in the evening. It was another good press conference. I've enjoyed his press conferences so far. I would say he's definitely more guarded than Postecoglou is with his answers, but I think the more comfortable he gets with us, the probably better he'll become in them as well. I think his humour is starting to refine it a bit, which is good. I think some of the stuff he's saying is some quite funny stuff, but also really insightful stuff. I get the impression he's going to be very good on tactical stuff. It's not really a time yet to dive into tactics too much, but I think as we go into the season, I think he's going to be really fascinating on that. And I think he is starting to know us. I'm hoping that I benefited from going on the tour, that I was, with myself and Jay from the Athletic. Jay obviously knew him from his Brentford time, so he was already there. He'll be like the guy the boy putting the apple on the teacher's desk. He's like the one that he'll have known for a long time. So I think going on the tour has probably helped me a bit. He does seem to kind of see me in a room when he comes in and stuff like that. And it's that's not me saying like, oh, love me, or anything like that. It is just purely the case that if you can build a rapport with a manager, you just get more out of them. It's the same with a player. It's just an easier way of getting the info that you guys and girls need. We stand a better chance if they kind of trust us that little bit more. So that's a press conference. A little bit on the Super Cup. I'm aware that because I've done this a day later, it is a little bit in the past now. But I just thought the formation was excellent. I thought the whole tactical setup was excellent. He'd hatched the plan after the heavy Bayern defeat. They were going to play with this 3-5-2 kind of formation, which could become like a 3-4-1-2 if required. He'd used it frequently at Brentford, Thomas Frank, and he knew it would give Spurs this kind of more solid foundation. Players worked on it on training after the Bayern game. Danso, of course, slotting in alongside Romero and Van de Ven. I was really pleased I got my predicted team spot on. I was really very, very happy with that. It was the first competitive game of the season. Probably the last time I get it right, but of course, you had Kudus up front as well, Richarlison. It was a very clever partnership with Richarlison, the physical player, trying to win the knock-ons in the air and stuff like that, and Kudus, his strength, winning the second ball a lot and holding it up. I thought they were both superb up front on the day. It was just missing that kind of final bit in the box, the two of them. They just played really well. I just thought they were both excellent on the night. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? If you're playing a team that's going to have a lot of the ball and has the quality to, let's be honest, destroy most teams going forward, if you've got a player or two in the opposition half, that if the ball comes to them and they're on their own and they've got players at their back, they can hold it. It allows you to breathe. It allows the other players to sweep up the pitch without the fear that if we run forward, we're suddenly going to be exposed if this guy loses the ball. So I think the work Kudus and Richarlison did, and that was honed on the training pitches, just absolutely paid off for 85 minutes or so. I just thought they were excellent. I thought, we mentioned him earlier, Andreas Georgsson. I thought the set piece restart work he'd done with the team, brilliant. PSG just could not handle it. They couldn't handle the kind of long, deep free kicks from Porro, from Vicario. They couldn't deal with the Kevin Danso throw, which looked like a man just flicking a pea across the room. I have never seen someone put seemingly less effort into a throw, yet launch it. It's like Superman throwing an American football out of a stadium. That's essentially what it looked like. It was brilliant. And we've waited a while for it, and it was worth the wait. It's going to be... that is going to be a potent weapon whenever Danso is playing, and I'm all for it. I don't mind having... People will say, oh, it's Route 1 or it's old school football. No, it's another weapon in your armoury. Use it. It created chaos every time. PSG didn't know what to do. It's going to be brilliant. I think Danso, I remember, told us out in Korea that Ben Davies also has a very good throw on him as well. So that's 2 players. You could really do with a player who's definitely going to start. That would be nice. I don't know what Porro's throws like, but maybe he'll end up being someone as well. But yeah, it worked really well. Romero, new captain, I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was heavily involved from the start. Of course, it was his header from Vicario's long kick, went across. Paulinho has the shot. The new keeper, Lucas Chevalier, tips onto the crossbar, falls perfectly for Mickey van der Ven to slot home. Lovely moment. The look on his face as he scored was brilliant. Obviously, because Bilbao, he contributed at the other end with his acrobatic clearance, and here he was in Udine doing his bit at the other end of the pitch. And Romero there again, just after the break, when Porro, wasn't it? Porro picked him out completely unmarked, heads it across. Yeah, Chevalier, let's be honest, probably should have done better with it, but still, far corner of the net. Great celebration, although he didn't get booked for it. I don't know whether it's just different in Europe or not, but he bounded over that barrier and was going towards some of the Spurs fans down that side. Just Spurs, I felt, caused problems all the time going forward. PSG had the ball, but I can't really... Maybe one Vicario save that I can remember, pushing a curling shot from the right away. But other than that, it was kind of Spurs had the better chances. Richarlison went through, had a shot tipped over the bar. Danso heading the side netting. I remember Bentancur heading over. Pat Matasar had this run early in the second half when he looked almost through on goal and he was brought down. It was so frustrating. You could tell it was the kind of chance that looked like it was going to lead to a third goal. But then Tottenham tired. They did. The subs weren't able to match the level of the players on the pitch. Whether that's due to a lack of sharpness or just being at a lower level. And of course, PSG throw on fresh talent and Lee Kang in, Gonçalo Ramos come on, killing pronunciation, sorry. And of course, it had to be 2 fresh pairs of legs that scored the goals in the final minutes that swung it back in the balance. And the dreaded penalty shootout. I'm sure you're like me. As soon as it's a shootout, I'm just like, it's done. And even when, they sent an early penalty wide, PSG was like, it's still not going to happen, and it didn't. Mickey van der Ven has his saved, and Matisse Tel sends his wide. Good quote from Frank after the game, I felt. He said, I knew we had to do something a little bit different against PSG. It was a special operation. In medical terms, the operation succeeded, but the patient died. So not that good in the end. But we worked on a game plan that was a little bit different, and it was very close to succeeding. While I was typing up Thomas Frank, I could hear Luis Enrique during his press conference just alongside. And he said, Tottenham deserved much more. They played better than us. Football is sometimes unfair. I'm happy for that, but I must say it was unfair. To be honest, I'm not sure we deserve this trophy. The difference was stark between Tottenham. They've had 6 weeks of preparation and we've had 6 days. It was huge and we were trying to play our football and just couldn't for the first 80 minutes. We had a lot of poor passes and maybe we were lucky. Lady Luck was smiling on us. He was very good about that. Look, I know it's small comfort, isn't it, when the manager always kind of, a lot of the time after a winning will say, like, oh, they were really good. But he felt like he was being genuinely honest. And there was the fitness element to it. PSG after Club World Cup, we spoke about this ahead of the game, whether it might be a thing. And I think it was on the day. I think we saw that they came back and just 6 days in training. They didn't have a single friendly in a month since that Club World Cup, that final against Chelsea. So they looked rusty at times. And maybe just as they got sharper as the game wore on, that was a key difference. But yeah, I think while the trophy would have been a huge boost, don't get me wrong, a huge boost early on to Thomas Frank era to immediately say in your first game you won a trophy, that'd be a massive thing. I still think we all hopefully took a lot from that game about Thomas Frank and the way he sets his team up. And absolutely, I know there were some people that said the high sub should have been later or different players or whatever. I kind of didn't disagree with the subs. Having seen a lot of those players kind of going down with cramp and stuff and struggling, I think they had to come off. But yeah, I thought a lot could be taken from that game in terms of how they're going to be against the big sides. And we saw what Brentford did to big sides. Brentford were a bit of a giant killer whenever they played the big boys. And I think Spurs now will have that structure to take them on as well. But, you know, he needs to be able to replace like for like when he brings players on. That's no disservice to players coming on, but some of them are young and some of them need time to improve and grow and develop. And someone like Solanke was not match sharp at all. You could see that. The difference between him and Richarlison was huge, which is funny, isn't it? Because you might have said the reverse at different points of last season. But definitely Richarlison looks like a really fit and sharp player after a whole pre-season, whereas Solanke, just played those early minutes at Reading and that's it. And it does show. It is now upon the powers that be, to ensure that Thomas Frank has like for like when he's making these subs going forward. Where we were sat in the press box at the stadium, which is technically called the Blue Energy Stadium. It's all run together, you see, with one E in the middle. But I think UEFA just called it a Stadio de Friuli or something. I think it says it on there. I don't know if that's because UEFA competitions, you're not allowed to have the sponsor because they haven't paid to be a sponsor for that event. Something like that, which is why World Cup and Euros, you'll often see the stadiums have these generic names. But anyway, where we were sat in the press box looking down, it was just like a who's who of people. We were above the posh seats. So, like, you had Gennaro Gattuso and Leonardo Bonucci sat in front of us. Various former footballers we could see, various people from within the game. And Johan Langer was about 3-4 rows in front of us, sat next to Fabio Paratici, which is, I mean, look, you've heard me say this before. He's got this consultancy contract with Spurs that ends Paratici at the conclusion of this summer transfer window. His global ban for those events at Juventus has now been completed. He is expected to eventually return in a more official capacity at Spurs. But I just thought it was quite interesting that whenever we've seen him at Spurs games before, he's been very separate. He has been, where was it? Was it Bilbao? I think he was just kind of almost among fans. At the Spurs stadium, we often see him sat up behind the press box in one of the boxes. I think it might be Base's box, as a guest of them rather than anything to do with the club. This was the first time we've seen him at a Tottenham game from what I can remember, very publicly as part of Tottenham's delegation with a Tottenham seat. And that's, that's quite a big thing, really. And from what I understand, while they're very different characters, Johan Langer and Fabio Paratici, they do apparently mesh quite well together and their skill sets complement each other. And from what I understand, Johan Langer's stock at Spurs is pretty high right now. And I would imagine if Paratici does come in as expected, they'll work together. I think a lot of people have kind of just assumed that Paratici would edge out Johan Langer, but I think it would be like a cohabiting kind of thing. They are very different. I think they kind of operate at different kind of levels within a club as well. So I can see how that would work. Whether long term it would be sustainable, I don't know. But certainly in the meantime, I think they would complement each other. What else did I see looking down? Johan Langer was speaking to Dan Ashworth. Dan Ashworth is the FA's chief football officer. He was there when Langer went down at half time. Fabio Paratici kind of stood up for a moment, did one of those little bit of an awkward where he looked around and was like, oh, everyone's gone. And then he got on his phone. It was not the old school on the kind of wired earphone thing, but he was very much pressed to his ear. Remember the days when all the Spurs fans were going mad? I remember posting images of him just like at a pre-season friendly. I think an under-20, didn't go to many under-21s games. Probably a pre-season friendly, I think it was, by the side of the pitch. And people going absolutely mad, like, what's he cooking and all of this malarkey? But look, he and Langer need to help Spurs make this kind of statement and transfer market because they do. They lack creative options. They absolutely do. It's very much deja vu from the end of last season. You can't survive with Maddison and Kulusevski both out of the team right now in terms of creative stuff. And as I said about Eze, I think he covers a lot of boxes as well. I want Savinho and him, but he does also cover a wing role as well. And I think if I'm Oliver Glasner, I'm absolutely kicking up a fuss to try and not let him leave Palace. I mean, I think he had 25 goal involvements in 43 games for Palace last season. He is a huge player for them. And don't forget, Glasner lost Elise last summer, didn't he, to Bayern. Mark Gay potentially leaving this summer. It's not definite that he will, but I don't think Palace will want to lose him on a free next year as well. I think Steve Parish has pretty much said that. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. Look, Johan Langer will have backup options, various different kind of players from various countries if Eze and Savinho don't happen. But they'd be huge gets if Spurs could prize them away from Palace and City, respectively. They really could. Ready-made Premier League players, loads of experience. Eze really ready to make the step up into the Premier League. That'd be huge for him. And like I said, Spurs need to close that gap. They need to get up to the big boys. And with 2 flourishes of a fountain pen and 2 contracts signed, you'd kind of just have a huge statement of intent. Honestly, if they were to do that and a centre-back, that window would suddenly go from a 4 to pushing a 9, maybe a 10. Ideally, I'd like to see them bring in another fullback, but he has publicly said when I asked about it, no, Thomas Frank, that's not where he's looking for someone. So you never know. At the end of the window, maybe Ben Davies does get an offer and they let him go, and maybe they feel that they do need to bring in another fullback. But yeah, who knows? They didn't expect to lose Maddison for the season either, did they? So you don't know what's going to happen in the coming weeks. But, one person that was not at the game on Wednesday night, if you weren't aware, was Daniel Levy. His daughter is apparently starting university in the USA, and he was there with the rest of the family to kind of see her all settled in and all of that. So it's understandable, isn't it? As someone that had to be at his daughter's graduation and ended up getting a later flight out to Hong Kong and missed the first press conference by 10 minutes. I get the need to kind of do important family moments because they only come around once, don't they? They really do. Often do anyway. So yeah, I get that. But that did mean that Vinay Venkatesham was kind of the man doing the official stuff. I could see him down with the UEFA president, Seferin, and the PSG owner, Nasser Al-Khelafi was down there. Khelafi. They were either side of him. It was like the UEFA power and these 2 guys. I would imagine that Venkatesham knows both very well from his Arsenal days and being on European football bodies as well. So, yeah, it's not like they were just throwing some newbie to the Wolves or anything. He would be very well known to them. So these are the guys, that hierarchy, Langer, Paratici, Venkatesham and Levy. They're the guys that can ensure that Thomas Frank can do what he needs to do on the pitch in terms of having the available quality to compete against so many different teams and of different types and different competitions and every 3 days. And like I said, I'm fascinated to see how they play against Burnley. That is my big thing. Goals haven't really flowed freely, have they? That's been the one thing I would say about this kind of this summer thus far. It's not quite clicking. To be fair, he admitted that today. He said, we'll be more offensive tomorrow. We have to, we want to. That's probably, to be completely honest, that's the area where we are probably not fully firing yet for various reasons. We will have a plan and we'll be very ready for tomorrow. But I think all that added together, to do that consistently every game, probably that will not just be fully firing yet. Hopefully tomorrow will be very good, and then it can be the next 3 games, it'll be a dip, and then we go again. Because if you look at the majority of Spurs' goals this summer have been scored by centre-backs. Obviously, Pat Matasar got a few, as I think he's had 3. And attacking players, I think you've only got Brennan Johnson and Will Lancashire, who's obviously at Oxford now on loan. Indy was just reminding me of that, Lancashire. I don't know if you can hear him in the background going mad. There must be someone walking by. So we need to see how they play against a low block, and that is why I'm so looking forward to going back to Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's been 3 months now. I hope it's a sunny day. That would be nice. Not that's the most important thing. I just want them to win, but the vibes are good, aren't they? There's the potential protest as well. I think there is a protest at 1:30. I think it is changed for Tottenham as well, going on before the game. So, of course, we'll kind of talk about that and how that pans out as well. I would say, again, look at the 10:30 stuff today for a little bit more on that. And yeah, we'll see who's in that starting 11 as well. Who can play, who can't, who's going to be in a good position to play. Paulinho. I'd love to see Paulinho play again. There was this really fascinating moment with him after he came off. And I look back about Paulinho because I did think about him as a potential for the leadership team, even though he's currently only on loan. And I look back and he'd never really been a captain anywhere he'd been before. So I was then kind of surprised when he came off the pitch and he was in the dugout, the technical area, constantly going around shouting instructions, telling players to calm down those final minutes and everything. It obviously didn't work, but he did it to such an animated degree that the fourth official just went, sit down. You're not one of the coaching staff and to go and sit next to Kudus and Richarlison. But yeah, I just thought that was quite interesting. It's quite a nice thing to see as well, that he clearly is a presence in that regard as well. He believes that something kind of special is coming this season. He said after the game, he came into the mix zone. He said, I think we showed what we are here to get in the future. I think we have all the conditions to achieve this season. I think the future will bring us something special. We played against a top opponent, a top game, but in the Premier League and also in every single league, there are top games. We cannot relax, and the good thing now is we have another game on Saturday to change the things and start on the right foot in the Premier League. Fascinating to see who he brings in. He could bring in Bergvall. He could bring in Brennan Johnson. Who knows about Yves Bissouma? I'd be surprised if he's in the starting lineup, but you never know. And of course, Matisse Tell, who sadly appears to be that he's going to be the scapegoat for the 25-26 season. I just could go on a whole social media rant, but there's no need to. You know my feelings on social media and the way people treat others on it. Better than me saying anything. Dominic Solanke wrote on Instagram after the abuse, Spurs put out a statement on it, and Solanke went, pathetic, will it ever stop? Anyone can miss a penalty, big up bro for taking one. Richarlison posted, winning or losing, getting it wrong or right, it's all part of the game. Racism is not. Tell is still a young lad, great player at the beginning of his journey and doesn't deserve this, just like anyone else. This type of behaviour has no place anywhere anymore. I hope these people, if I can even call them that, are severely punished. It's so easy to hide behind a social media profile spreading hate and this kind of speech. Something has to change. We're with you, Tell. And look, if a 20-year-old can be abused after the first competitive game of the season and being brave enough to take a penalty in such a big occasion, just what hope is there for anyone else? That's just... who knows what stars of the past would have even made it to that stage? I always think of Gareth Bale. He was it 24 games without winning a single game with Spurs. Can you imagine if social media was like it is now back then? He would never have even got to the stage where he would have done all that for Spurs. He would have gone somewhere else and been a star because he would have been kind of hounded out. We'd have never had that night in the San Siro. It's like people expect them to be computer game characters, like they're all FIFA characters or Football Manager ones rather than the actual real people. And, these young players, they don't need to settle, develop, adapt, whatever. They're all Yamin Lamal. Yeah, they can play straight away. They're all generational talents. It's just so frustrating. And look, I know that this is a minority, and I know the players, the staff, the true Tottenham fans are going to gather behind these players and Tell right now and just, and be there. I think the reaction to him is going to be brilliant tomorrow. That's fully what I'm expecting. You forget, I think people do forget that Bayern signed him as a 17-year-old for £25 million from Rennes. That doesn't happen if you're not a footballer with a huge amount of potential. I looked up some of the quotes at the time. The sporting director of Bayern at the time, Hassan Salahamidzic, said Tell's one of the biggest talents in Europe. A lot of clubs wanted to sign him. Nagelsmann, who was the manager then, said, I have a vision that he'll one day score 40 goals in a season. And look, he's not a bad player. He's just a player that is adapting and learning and figuring out exactly where his role is on the pitch. Is he going to be a left winger? Is he going to be a striker? Is he going to be a support striker? Thomas Frank likes him, and you'll see him used quite a lot this season. It's just about developing his strike. He only turned 20 not that long ago. Yeah. find a little Paulinho quote for you because I thought it was quite a nice one. He said, "I think it's the beginning of a journey together. It's a new team for me as well. Tottenham is a great club. It has all the conditions to achieve good things. It showed in the past and for sure it will show again in the future. I shared the dressing room with top players as well. We have a top coach who is a top human being." See, told you people say that. "I think we all have the conditions together to achieve good things. I think we just need to be with our heads up and keep fighting because the journey is really long. Saturday starts a new journey for us as a team and we are really motivated for the beginning of the Premier League." Yeah, it is upon us. The Premier League season is upon us and Spurs are going to be ready for it on and off the pitch. As the old adage goes, fail to prepare and you must prepare to fail. They need to make a splash, Spurs, and they know it. The club is fully aware they have to do that, especially after the big proclamations made after the Europa League triumph. There is this expectation of funds being injected in. I think that's why we're going to see these transfers happen, hopefully. Because look, they need to make a splash. They need to swim, if we're going to keep with the water analogy, because they just can't sink before they start going. They need Thomas Frank to succeed. We all need him to succeed because we need another season to remember, and for the good reasons as well. We've got that taste now, haven't we, of silverware again, and we want much more. I want this to be a brilliant season, and hopefully it all starts tomorrow against Burnley. And I'm not talking on probably Sunday about a disappointing, damp squib of a beginning. We'll see. Right, I'm going to head off. It's getting very warm in this room. I don't think I'm sweating quite yet, but it is very warm here in England. Not as warm as it was in Italy, but very warm. Like I said, I'll probably either try and record another video after the game late at night, which will probably go early on Sunday morning. And keep an eye on all the transfer news because I get this feeling that now things are going to suddenly go whoop when things happen, rather than we've had this kind of slow build up now. And I think we're at the period where stuff just has to happen quickly and Spurs can't mess about with things. And I think that leads itself to either quickly advancing on these deals that they want, or if they get any hint that it's just not going to happen, they need to quickly switch to bring in another player of a similar quality. So fingers crossed that all happens. Right, time to head off. Sorry it was a bit of a long one, but like I said, I had to pack a load in, and hopefully there's some little bits and pieces you weren't aware of before in there. Tried to get as much new insight in as possible. There'll be more to come as the weeks and years go on. Tottenham Hotspur, eh? What a club. Right, as always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.